Ward takes a closer look at both their campaign contributors to help you understand who is supporting each candidate.
Yeah, with all of the campaign ads and the negative rhetoric that we see, it's hard to understand what's real and what just sounds good in a campaign ad. So I wanted to follow the money to get a better understanding of the industries and the businesses behind each of these candidates. Why is that important? Well, because it helps you know if the money that is fueling their campaign matches the businesses and the industries and the people here in Eastern Washington. So let's take a look, and we're going to start with the latest FEC data and data from the Center for Responsive Politics, which kind of just categorizes that FEC data. You can see Kathy McMorris Rodgers, the blue is in-state. 49% of her money is coming from in-state. 51% is coming from out-of-state. Take a look over here at Lisa Brown, a full 88% coming from in-state, 12% coming from out-of-state. So obviously a very big difference there. Now let's break it down even more when we talk about the money coming from within the 5th district itself. So Kathy McMorris Rodgers has 22% coming from in the district, 69% of her funding coming from out of the district. As we take a look over here at Lisa Brown, again, in district is in blue, 47% is in the district, and 43% is coming from outside of the 5th district. Now I want you to take a moment and understand that that doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. Oftentimes this is the case for an incumbent like McMorris Rodgers, who has been in office for as long as she has, simply because an incumbent makes a lot of connections during their considerable time in Washington, D.C. Okay, so that's the where. Now let's take a look at the who. For Kathy McMorris Rodgers, the #1 industry contributing to her campaign is securities and investments. Also a lot of support from retirees as well as pharmaceutical companies and health product companies. For Lisa Brown, again, you'll notice a lot from retirees as well as Democratic and liberal organizations and education. Now, if you break that down even further, you're going to see the top 20 companies donating to the candidates through their political action committees. So for Kathy McMorris Rodgers, it's things like Goldman Sachs, Berkshire Hathaway. You'll see Money Tree, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Then on Lisa Brown's side, you're going to notice quite a few of the state universities, WSU, Eastern Washington University, as well as UW. And you will also notice some of the traditionally Democratic organizations like PAC to the Future, and to some extent End Citizens United or League of Conservation Voters. So what does all of that mean? Well, in general, it means these groups support each candidate's position on certain issues. The question has always been, how much does it influence their vote? So how do you accept money from these liberal-leaning organizations while still saying that you're going to represent the interests of people here in Eastern Washington when we are traditionally much less liberal-leaning?
I think it's not so much about liberal versus conservative, and it's more about specific issues. Like End Citizens United wants to change money in politics, and I think liberals and conservatives can agree that we want the interests of families and businesses in Eastern Washington represented, not the special interests running the agenda.
But you must understand that there is a disconnect between Eastern Washington and Western Washington, and people on this side often feel that their voice isn't heard because of this, such a greater population over in the Seattle area, which tends to be more liberal leaning. So how do you tell people here that you're still going to represent the more conservative interests here on this side of the mountains?
Fortunately, in my case, they can just look at my track record, and that was a track record of getting our fair share of state resources for things like the Fox Theater, the YMCA in Spokane, roads and bridges, water projects in Southeast Washington, university buildings in Pullman and Cheney and Spokane. So that track record of getting things done for Eastern Washington, I think is what people are really looking for in Congress as well. I think they want a member of Congress who's really laser focused on Eastern Washington, not either political party and not tied into the party's agenda, but really focused in on what's good for farmers here, what's good for families and businesses here.
The #1 industry for campaign donations currently is securities and investments. So we're talking about $250,000 from PACs for companies like Goldman Sachs, Berkshire Hathaway, companies obviously that are not based here in Eastern Washington. So what do you say to people who might question if your loyalties lie with Wall Street and out-of-state big business as opposed to people here in the 5th district?
I've had over 15,000 contributions, individual contributions this campaign cycle. And clearly there's more money pouring into this race, both on my side and my opponent's side, than we've seen in a long time. Millions and millions of dollars. Anyone who contributes to my campaign, they are They are contributing and supporting my agenda and my priorities, which are always the people of Eastern Washington. In fact, I've supported legislation that the big banks opposed.
So do those contributions influence your vote?
The contributions are about them supporting my agenda and my priorities, which are about the people of Eastern Washington.
All right, so now I want to take a look at some of the local and the regional organizations on that top 20 list of contributors for both candidates. So for Kathy McMorris Rodgers, you're going to see things like Hecla Mining, Vaughan Brothers Lumber, Schweitzer Engineering. As we take a look at Lisa Brown, Amazon, Planned Parenthood, and Providence, as well as a number of trade unions. So very different sources. Now remember when I talked about all of that out-of-district funding that's very common for incumbents like Kathy McMorris Rodgers? Well, this is very common for Democratic candidates. Significant contributions from trade unions like food and commercial workers, painters and allied trades, as well as electrical workers. But just like any campaign, sometimes contributions are controversial, and this race is no different. So we've talked about pharmaceutical contributions before from PACs for pharmaceutical companies. It's actually listed as the number 5 top contributing industry. So how do you accept that money while still telling people here in Eastern Washington that you're fighting to lower drug costs?
I would tell them to look at the record. Look at the record. I have supported transparency and accountability for pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs. They're the middlemen. So you have the manufacturers and then you have the patient. And it's the PBMs where you see the most dramatic increase. I am pleased that this administration is actually moving more towards the generics. When you look at the cost of prescription drugs, about 10% of the prescription drugs are brand names, but they account for over 70% of the actual cost. So if we can move to generics, that's a positive. I am proud to have led on 21st Century Cures, which is legislation to advance cures rather than focusing so much on how we're going to pay for Alzheimer's. Let's focus on how we're going to cure Alzheimer's.
Planned Parenthood, one of your contributors, kind of controversial here in Eastern Washington and lots of other places as well. They have donated $10,000 to your campaign. So how do you think that that could influence a potential vote if it had to do with Planned Parenthood? And how do you balance that here in Eastern Washington?
Well, I'm really clear. Family planning and access to the full medical information for women is very important. It's something that I believe is shared by most people in Eastern Washington. I am proud to be a supporter of them. The Representative McMorris Rodgers has supported a rule that would essentially deprive them of funding, not for the more controversial abortion services, but for all their services. And that would cause people in Eastern Washington to lose access to health care that they really need. And so for me, this is a very clear difference of opinion that we have on this issue and a different voting record. And it makes sense for people to understand that and to make up their mind about whether they want to see women's choice and healthcare services supported or not.
So again, it's very clear that these two candidates differ in a lot of ways, from their positions on certain issues to where the money is coming from that is funding their campaign. But both agree that we do need more transparency when it comes to campaign funding. But of course, how we get there may look very different depending on who wins in November. So right now we have just a few more weeks to go until the general election. If there are any questions that you have that you would like me to ask either one of these candidates, don't hesitate to contact me. Please get a hold of us either on Facebook or Twitter, or you can always email me directly at wward@krem.com. In the studio tonight, Whitney Ward, KREM 2 News.